our staff, council, and residents adapting to our teleconference format due to the COVID-19 pandemic. Tonight's meeting will be held under Minnesota State Statute 13D.021 that permits a public body to hold a meeting via telephone or other electronic means due to the COVID-19 pandemic. For members of the public, the meeting is being live streamed on the city YouTube page. The Wyoming City Council special meeting will be recorded as part of the public record. After each agenda item is read and staff gives a report on the agenda item, I will call upon each council member individually if they have a question on that particular item. If you wish to make a motion or second a motion, please state your name first. All votes on all items will be completed by a roll call to meet the standard for state statute 13D.021. With that, I would like to, we don't have a flag, do we? All right, I'll make sure I get that back up on mine. So with that, we'll start the meeting with our agenda on number 1, to consider authorizing the payments of recommended invoices and bills for the CARES Act dollars. Mr. Linwood, are you starting with that?
I sure can, Mayor. This is, as council is aware, we added this to our meeting tonight. The deadline for the use of those CARES Act dollars is the 15th. So we've been busy completing this invoice, claims list to you. As you may notice, there are some items on here that are CARES Act items and some that are not, but that's just for when we have bills and through a claim list activity, the way our accounting software works. It may be just coded to a normal account, but the main pieces on here to approve those CARES Act dollars. We did late in the day, we got you a updated list that it was inclusionary of a few more invoices and most importantly, our business grants. So I'm happy to report that said and done that we were able to utilize the city council initially authorized approximately $90,000 on those grants. And then earmarked an additional $25,000 if necessary, but we were able to utilize approximately $85,000 of those grants between nonprofits and business grants. So we're happy. I think that it was successful, and I think the businesses that were able to utilize it certainly appreciate it. So with that, we'll just need, if there's any questions on the claims list, otherwise just a motion to approve that list when ready, Council Mayor.
All right, so I will go around and see if there's any questions first. Member Yeager.
Yeah, are all these expenses going to hold up if somebody gets picky about them? Because I'm seeing mouse traps and plowing. So
I can explain that. If you notice, the mouse trap isn't coded under COVID. That, like I had stated, that some of these items are just normal operating expenses. In regards to that, the situation with the snow plowing, that is an expense that was related to our operations in regards to the COVID pandemic, and be able to make sure that we can conduct those operations as necessary, and it was necessary due to being short-staffed for reasons of COVID-19. So certainly we've worked with our staff and our finance director and guidance from the League of Minnesota Cities and U.S. Treasury, and we feel confident that the expenditures that we have made on those dollars, if we were audited, would be authorized as usable. So we feel we have done that due diligence.
Oh, okay, cool. Because I was looking fridge and a microwave.
That would be that we've had to, as you're aware, council member, we have separated our public works crew. So we have essentially two shops right now. So to set up some sort of break room as part of that social distancing in those two teams, it was necessary that they had somewhere to keep their lunches and be able to heat their lunches at the secondary shop right now. So that would fall as an eligible expense underneath the CARES Act.
Cool. I just wanted to make sure that there wasn't any nasty surprises or nasty auditing somewhere. That's all I had.
Okay.
All right, Member Schilling.
I actually do not have any questions.
Member Luker.
I have no questions either.
Right. I just want to thank the staff. I know how much time and energy they put into this list. I know that they were very careful when it came to knowing that there could be an audit and making sure that everything that was on there really fit into what fit into the criteria. It was very difficult for a while, if I remember correctly, Mr. Linwood, because they kept changing what those boundaries were, what those guidelines were. So I'm very confident that staff did a really good job with this. So with that, we will need a motion to approve. Again, so we need a motion to approve the payments of the recommended invoices and bills for the CARES Act dollars. Do we have a motion to approve?
Member Schilling, so moved.
Member Schilling makes that first. Do we have a second?
Member Luger will second.
Member Luger makes the second. I will do roll call, please. Member Yeager.
Aye.
Member Schilling.
Aye.
Member Luger.
Aye.
And Mayor Iverson is an aye. We'll move on to number 2 to consider resolution 20-11-101, a resolution certifying the general election results for the city of Wyoming. Mr. Linwood, are you taking that one as well?
Yes, Mayor, I can start that certainly. This is a resolution. This is a necessary component of our election process to canvass and certify the election results for the city of Wyoming. This year, due to some different court proceedings, it was necessary that we wait until after the 10th when these elections were completely completed and through that absentee balloting process. So what is being presented to you tonight is the final results is updated by the Chisago County Auditor as of November 10th. So this is the most accurate canvassing of those results, and they are presented. And secondly, I just wanted to say that Ms. Dumas really was the one who organized our election judges this year and did a lot of the work putting together this election. I think it really went smoothly, and she did a really nice job making sure that was a successful outcome. And I know we've had a lot of compliments that people felt safe and they felt that it was a smooth election process with some different things this year. But with that, I can stand for any questions.
Right. Ms. Dumas, first I'm going to say thank you. I know you did a great job, so we really appreciate that. And was this your first election doing this?
Yes, it was.
Good learning experience, right?
Absolutely.
Great. All right. I'll call on each member. Member Schilling.
I was just also going to thank Ms. Dumas as well for all her hard work, because I know a lot of people that I spoke with said it went very smooth as well. So we really appreciate all that. That was all I had.
Thank you.
All right. All right. And Member Yeager.
No questions.
Member Luger.
I have no questions, but I definitely echo the sentiment of appreciating all the hard work that went into it. I heard much of the same response, that it was a great, seamless, safe experience. And so that's a credit to city staff. Thank you.
Agreed. And it was a long night for everybody, a long day and a long night. So it definitely wasn't an easy day by any means. Mr. Linwood, do you know about how many people cast votes? Do you have an idea total?
The day of the election, Ms. Dumas, I don't know if you have those updated numbers.
I don't have the specific number. I know it was in total we had around I think it was a little over 5,000 votes total. Some of those were absentees that were sent to the county directly, but we did have was it a couple of 2,000?
2,800 the day of, about 2,800.
Yeah, the day of.
Yep, in person.
Mm-hmm.
Great, awesome. All right, so with that, we need a motion to approve resolution 20-11-101, a resolution certifying the general election results for the city of Wyoming. Do we have a motion to approve? I will make that first motion. Do we have a second?
Member Luger will second.
Member Luger makes that second, and roll call, please. Member Yeager.
Aye.
Member Schilling.
Aye.
Member Luger.
Aye.
Mayor Iverson is an aye, and I would like to also welcome Brett Onstad to council. January, what's our first meeting? The 3rd or the 4th?
I believe it's the 4th, but I have to double check that.
All right. So anyways, we'll welcome a new council member. All right. Number 3 on the agenda, the 2021 budget discussion and consideration.
Mayor, members of council, to start off tonight, we will have a presentation from Mr. Dragisich from Baker and Tilly. The city council selected Baker Tilly along with the help from our city engineer, WSB, and Mark Erickson to conduct a study for our stormwater rates. As council knows, we continue to have to do more things in regards to maintain our EPA requirements and then our MS4 permit most of all. Basically, that's the different activities that we need to do to make sure that that permit continues to be valid. So we've given Mr. Dragisich and Baker Tilly a lot of different data to analyze and come up with for what the necessary tasks and necessary maintenance and operations are going to be for that moving forward, to come up with a draft stormwater rate study presentation tonight. And with that, I can let Mr. Dragisich kind of begin the discussion on that.
Thank you. I'm going to share my screen so I can put the report up. Let's see. So, as Rob said, we received a lot of data from the city. I'm not going to go through this page by page, but rather kind of walk through the broad overview and what our recommendations are. So what the objectives we started out to was, to undertake a comprehensive stormwater utility rate and fee study. That's what you hired us to do, looking at all of the factors that would impact your need to finance, generate enough revenue to pay for the costs that you anticipate you're going to have. Some of these costs are listed here. So first thing we do is some background. So we look back over the past period from 2017, actually through your budget 2020, at what was happening in the surface water fund. This graph shows that from 17, 18, 19, and your budget 2020, that your operating expenses had exceeded your operating revenues every year. So the fund was experiencing operating losses. The ending cash balance actually has increased, though, from 97,000 in 2017 to 125,000, almost 126,000 at the end of 19, and it's projected to be 130,000 in your 2020 budget. So how does that happen if you have operating losses? Well, the operating losses are the result in part of the non-cash expense for depreciation. So when you purchase an asset in the utility fund, you don't deduct it as an expense, but you depreciate it. So a little bit of that every year is counted as an expense over the life of the asset. And so you can see how your ending cash balances have grown slightly over time. So this is the actual numbers that we're looking at. You can see the operating loss is 19,000 in 2017 and growing to 48,000 in your budget for 2020. And the other thing we'd point out is that there were no capital expenditures from the surface water utility fund over this entire period. Whatever capital is purchased is paid for by some other fund. Looking at your current surface water management fees, you have basically a residential fee of $2 per residential unit per quarter, and about $16.20 per acre for other uses, with the exception of your industrial non-urban, which is $2 per unit. That's kind of, well, that is actually what your rates are. And I'll stop in case anyone has any questions on the historical piece. I said, please feel free to ask questions at any time, because it's easier, I think, to look at it when we're on that page and to try and circle back. Okay, so the next thing we looked at was cash reserve policies. How much cash should you have in your utility fund as a matter of good practice? And there are a number of factors that we look at when we determine that, because there's not a one-size-fits-all. There's some, we list here like reserves you're legally required to have. So if you have revenue debt outstanding, you're required to have a certain level of cash reserves. What does a variability in your annual revenue stream look like? Does it flow nicely, or are there peaks and valleys in that? So you need enough cash to cover the months where you don't get a lot of revenue in there. How do your expenses vary? If it was your water utility, rainfall is an important factor. What is the condition of your assets? Do you have a lot of assets that you need to replace? So you have to build up some cash to do that. Your tolerance for risk. If you have a low tolerance for risk, you generally want to have more cash on hand because you don't want to be in the market borrowing money if something happens. And lastly, how many really large customers do you have? We work with some utilities where one customer is 50% of their revenue stream. So if that customer were to go out of business, they'd have a significant problem. You don't happen to have that in this fund, but it's just some of the factors that we look at. When we get done, we kind of establish a minimum of 3 months of anticipating operating expenses, an amount equal to next year's debt service. You don't have any debt in the stormwater utility fund, so we're recommending that you have at least 3 months of operating expenses in cash at the end of each year. That's consistent with the position of your other utility funds, so there lines up with those. We have a discussion about depreciation here. I've kind of touched on that already. It gets kind of esoteric for folks to look at that and say, well, what do you mean it's an expense, but it's a non-cash expense? But it is what it is, and it's an accounting process that goes into the utility funds. We made a number of assumptions to make our projections going forward. First, we look back at those 2016 to 2019 audited financial reports of the city. We looked at your 2020 surface water utility budget and the 2021 budget. What's important about the 21 budget is it shows a $200,000 grant to offset the cost of a street sweeper you're looking at purchasing, and a $250,000 transfer into the surface water utility fund from your capital revolving fund to pay for capital improvements. Those have significant impacts on the amount of revenue you're going to need. We looked at your current charges, as we said. We looked at your 21 through 25 capital improvement plan for the fund. What are you looking at in terms of needs for capital outlay over this period of 21 to 25? We also looked at your draft 2020 long-term plan that's being prepared by the city, because we didn't want to make any assumptions that were inconsistent with that plan, so that you had two financial projections in conflict with each other. The other assumption we made was that there wasn't going to be any real growth of revenues resulting from changes in land use. So we weren't going to have some big development that was going to change land use and add revenues or add expenses. We did project operating expenses to grow at 3% because that's consistent with your long range plan. So we have that tied together. Investment interest on any cash available was projected to be give a return of 1%, which is fairly conservative, but I don't imagine you're getting a whole lot more than that right now. We also assumed that we'd have this transfer in of $250,000, as we stated previously. So the city had a capital improvement program it gave us for the stormwater utility, and in total, it was $935,000. Excuse me, your plan went through 2025, as we show here. But since the RFP asked for a 10-year projection, we made projections for 26, 27, 28, 29, and 30 based on what your earlier plan looked like. We think it's a reasonable assumption. We reviewed that with staff and they agreed, but we want to have some capital outlay in those last 5 years so we didn't overstate what your cash balances would be. And so yes.
On the assumptions, the money that comes out of the capital revolving fund, will that have to be paid back?
There is no requirement to pay it back. You could choose to do so if you wanted. We did not make an assumption that would be paid back in our projections, but there's nothing preventing you from doing that.
So Mr. Linwood, do we plan on paying it back?
In the initial draft long-term plan that we had, we did not have that being paid back on that initial draft. And I think that's as Mr. Dragosich stated, that was what they're going off of right now, unless the council feels that's something they want to look at to play that component back. But that was not factored into that draft long-term plan.
Thank you.
Welcome.
And I just want to state for the record that was Councilmember Yeager that asked that question. So council members, please make sure you state your name for the record. Thank you.
Thank you.
Sorry, go ahead.
I would point out in the CIP for 2021, there's an excavator for $75,000, some pond and storm sewer and culvert improvements. for 40,000, a street sweeper, which is the biggest expenditure, for 250,000, although there's a projected $200,000 grant to offset most of that cost, and a Vector trailer unit, which is a device for cleaning out the storm sewers and catch basins, for 150,000. From 2022 forward, the assumptions are there's going to be improvements made to your ponds, your culverts, and your storm sewers each year, ranging from 40,000 to 55,000 going forward. So we start off doing our financial projections, and we always start off and say, what happens if you don't increase rates? Because we think that's a valuable piece of information. What happens to this fund if you choose not to make any rate increases at all? And so what would happen is your cash would go negative immediately in 2021. Negative means you run out of money in the fund and you'd have to transfer money from somewhere to pay those operating expenses. It would go negative by about $12,000. From that point, it would grow more negative each year, reaching a negative balance of about $1.3 million at the end of the planning period in 2030. So again, that says you would have to transfer $1.3 million over the next 10 years into the fund to pay for the projected operating and capital expenditures if you did nothing with rates. And again, I'll stop because that's a very important number in my mind because it tells you what happens with no rate increase. And so if we look at those actual projections for each year, first thing you see is that your operating losses every year and they're growing, and your ending cash gets more and more negative with each passing year. Here's a second part of that projection because you can't fit it all on one page and be able to read it, but there's that negative $1.32 million and at the end of 2030. So the next question we then ask is, well, what would rates have to increase to make this work, to pay for everything, meet your cash balance, ending cash balances that you should have, and get you to a point where the fund is operating sound on a financial basis? And so we did that projection, and what we came up with was that the monthly charges would have to go from $2 on the residential side to $4 a quarter in 2021. Or an increase of about $1.33 a month. It'd have to go to $7.20 a quarter in 2022 and $9.36 a quarter in 2023. From that point forward, the increases are fairly small, like 20 cents a quarter or so. But we have to get through the initial period covering the expenses. Part of what's driving that is there's a very large increase in operating expenses from 2020 to 2021. And so here's the actual financial projections showing at the top what the quarterly charges are, where they would have to go. They're currently $2. You go to $4, $7.20, $9.36, and then $9.55 by 2024. And you can see the operating expenses are projected to go from just over $100,000 in 2020 to $181,000 in 2021. So a very large increase in operating expenses as you try to be more proactive in your storm sewer fund and do the things you need to under your MS4 permit. We have operating losses in 2020, 2021, and 2022, but we start showing operating income positive in 2022 and 2023. Our cash stays positive and grows every year. We have our acquisition and construction of assets on this line. And as we go forward, we get to 974. Those increases are small from that point forward, getting to 1075 a quarter by 2030, and our ending cash 553. So what's good about that projection is it's operating as a utility fund should. Your operating income's positive, your cash is growing, meeting minimum requirements, and because we're estimating those capital outlays in the last 5 years, there's no firm plan in place. It gives you some additional cash to fund more capital outlays should you choose to do that, and avoid making transfers from the capital revolving fund when you have a street project or something else that comes up that you need to have stormwater improvements. Are there any questions on that first projection?
Looks like we're good.
All right, so then we said, is there any way to soften that? And we made a third financial projection, and we said, could we transfer a little bit more money into this fund as a loan? These would be loans, and pay it back later to try and ease that burden a little bit. And so we thought, well, if we transferred an extra $25,000 in 2021 and an extra $25,000 paid in 2023 and 2024 with interest to whatever fund borrowed the money, we could soften those increases a little bit to $3.60 a quarter in 2021, $6.48 a quarter in 2022, and then we match in 2023. We come back to where we were with the first projection, but we do ease into that a little bit more, and that does do many of the same things. We have positive operating income. Our cash is growing. Does all those things. The key is you'd have to first find a fund that could transfer that money in and have the will to do that, as opposed to raising rates a little bit higher in the early years. It's not a significant change, but it does provide some relief. Everything else is the same. Operating expenses, capital outlay are the same. The only difference is those two $25,000 transfers. So ultimately, people say, so what does that mean for bills? And this slide shows with the rate increases and no transfers, the residential quarterly charge going $2 to $4 in 2021, $7.20 in 2022, $9.36 in 2023, $9.55 in 24, and $9.74 in 25. If I'm a commercial, acre $16.20 goes to $32.40, then to $58.32, and $75.82, and then kind of levels out there, reaching about $79 in 2025. And if we transfer in, you can see that softening, $3.60 instead of $4, $6.48 instead of $7.20, and then we match up in 2023. On the commercial side, we're $29 rather than $32, and we're $52 rather than, I forgot what that was in 52 rather than 58. So there's a little bit of softening because of those loans, and then they match up in 2023. So we did a comparison with your neighboring community, see how do you match up? And so you're looking at the quarterly residential bills, and this is without the transfers. You can see that even in 2023, you're less than all of the neighboring communities on the residential bill. And these are the neighboring communities' charges in 2020. It assumes they don't change at all going forward, which I think is highly unlikely, but we don't know for sure. But your residential bills still remain lower than everybody else's over the next three years. If we put transfers in, it doesn't change anything. You still end up less than everybody else on the residential side over the next 3 years. On the commercial side, you remain below the average through 2022, and then in 23 you get a little bit above the average. Again, those are 2020 rates for the comparison cities, and these are your rates projected to 2023. And if we put in a transfer to soften the rate increase, it doesn't change the fact that for the first 3 years you're below average, and then in 2023 you rise a little bit above the average.
Can I ask one question, please? This is Mayor Iverson.
Yes, you can.
Forest Lake is, if I'm looking at these comparisons, Forest Lake is in the Met Council. Does the Met Council have anything to do with their surface water fees at all?
Nothing at all.
Okay, thank you.
So what were our conclusions and recommendations through all this? Well, we said your expected increase operating on capital needs, have increased operating and capital needs over the planning period. We talked about that increase of about $80,000 in operating costs, and you have these capital expenses, $935,000, projected in the fund, which hasn't had any capital outlay in the last 4 years, paid from it. Your current water rates, surface water rates are less than those of the neighboring communities. That's the conclusion. But that they need to be increased to provide revenues for operations and capital and recommended levels of cash reserves. We also recommend that you adopt that cash reserve policy. We talked about 90 days operating cash and next year's debt service should you issue any debt to be consistent with your water and sewer utility. And then we also tell our clients that they should adopt rates for the next 3 to 5 years, but reserve the right to visit them every year in case something changes. And the reason we say adopt them over the long term is it's difficult to do rate increases as it is. And if you visit every year, you have this yo-yo effect. You have the potential to have large increases, then do anything for a couple of years, then do large increases again. And if you look at a long-range projection like you've asked us to do for you and adopt them over the next 3 to 5 years based on that projection, you can be more predictable to your residents and your businesses on where your rates are going to go. And you know, absent any significant changes, that you're going to be covered in your utility operations. Now, you reserve the right to visit them every year, so they're not locked in stone that they can't be changed, but it just makes more consistent predictability for that fund and for your customers. So if I'm a business in Wyoming and my surface water bill, I know it's going to be for the next 3 years, I can budget for that effectively as opposed to wondering what's going to happen next year. We're recommending the rate increases listed below, which were the rate increases without any transfers, but we do say you could achieve transfers to soften those rate increases if you chose to, and there's obviously an infinite number of variables on those. You could put more money in to soften them, you could put more money in over more years if you had extra cash that you want to put in and delay those somewhat, but there's an infinite number of variables that could go along. And so that's kind of the draft of where we're at. After quite a bit of study, I would say that we are very thankful for the cooperation we got from city staff and from Mark Erickson and his staff as well, helping us try to understand what your needs are going to be operating going forward so we could build it into the projections. And I think someone didn't tell us over the course that these projections represent the best of your city staff and WSB and Baker Tilly.
All right. Thank you for that presentation. Mr. Linwood, do you want to open up to some discussion right now because I have questions, or do we need to have further presentation?
No, I'm ready for questions.
All right, great. All right, I'm going to start, and I'm sure I'd like to remind council that this is only a discussion. This is not something that we are taking action on right now. I know that at times that some of this gets out that we're doing this right now and we're making these changes right now. We are not. So for the public to know, this is for discussion only. So with that, I hope we have some great questions so we are all have some great understanding. First question, I believe I'm going to ask of Mr. Linwood. When was the last time we had a rate change in the surface water fee?
The rates were reevaluated back in 2000, I believe 11 or 2012, but there were not any significant changes made to the rates at that time. Prior to that, it's been, to my understanding, that essentially that they've remained the way they are for quite some time in regards to any kind of change on them whatsoever.
Okay, and so roughly, it should have been a 3% increase each year because, as we know, rates go up every year, right? We can't control that. So with the, I want to talk a little bit about these funds, and we as a body have to make sure that that we are working in the positive and not in the negative. Is that correct? Maybe there needs to be a little bit of understanding of what these funds do or why we have these funds and how they're paid for. So that way our community has an understanding how these are different than a tax levy.
They're a utility fund, an enterprise fund that should pay for themselves, pay their operating expenses, because the extent that they don't, you're putting taxpayer money into them, property tax money and other funds that aren't directly related to the benefit the customers receive from the service you're providing. So there's no rational nexus between the value of my home or my business and the amount of surface water runoff that goes, into the stormwater utility that it supports. The other important thing about having your utility funds adequately funded, having positive operating cash, having adequate level of cash reserves. I got to remember to slow down talking because I tend to talk too fast. I usually get in trouble when I'm out in our Richmond, Virginia office. They tell me I have to practice talking slow, and I'm not allowed to say y'all, no matter what. So, but the other important thing is when the credit rating agencies are looking at your financial management as a city, they're looking at all of your funds. And they're saying, how well do you manage your funds as a city? And to the extent that your funds aren't well managed and you're showing operating losses and negative cash and things like that, and transferring money around to cover those, they're saying, what's going on? And so there's a benefit to managing them well. Now, the increases we have going from $2 a month to $4 a month, in a relative term is fairly large, but in absolute terms is fairly minimal. We had anticipated doing an affordability analysis when we wrote our original proposal, but we didn't include one because at $2 a month increase, it didn't seem like, there was going to be an affordability issue on that particular fee. We did one, if you remember, for the sewer and water utility when we did those rate increases because those were more substantial. One of the measures now is how many hours does someone have to work at minimum wage to pay their monthly bill? Well, at $4, it would be 30, half an hour. So we didn't do that analysis. Didn't seem to make sense. But managing all of your enterprise funds well will pay you benefits beyond just, keeping things straight and not moving money around from one fund to another to cover operating losses. And I don't want to put Jean on the hot seat, but she's part of your financial advisor. And Jean, if there's anything you want to add, please feel free, because I think it's an important issue and a good point for them to understand.
Absolutely, Nick, and I agree with everything that you said. It's really important. You can think of your enterprise funds as almost like you're operating a separate business with each one of your water funds, sewer, surface water, whatever the case may be. Not only does that particular fund, with like what we're talking about this evening, not only does you need to cover your operations, but you also need to cover improvements. And so as Nick has been, talking about the depreciation factor and all of that, you should really be coming in at a positive number after all of that is said and done.
The other thing, someone asked the question, would you be repaying the capital revolving fund for this transfer? Well, if you look at the cash that, that you're going to increase in the fund, there would be an opportunity to either repay if you chose to do that. And I'm not saying you should or you shouldn't. That's a decision you need to make. But I think what it tells you is you'd avoid having to do that in the future. And you wouldn't be taking money from capital revolving fund necessarily. You wouldn't have to pay for improvements. You still could if you chose to, but you wouldn't have to.
Okay, and then I've got a couple more questions or thoughts on this.
Thank you, Jean, by the way.
It's good to see you, Jean. It's been a while too, by the way. So a couple things that I think is hard for people to understand, and I heard this a lot, and it's not just during campaign time, but just in general. When you bring up the pond and the stormwater and the culverts and what this all goes for, I think that our residents have a really hard time understanding exactly what we're doing, because I do hear this, and I hear this quite a bit. Well, my pond has never been dredged, or my culvert needs to be replaced, and it's never been replaced. So how will this be able to help us get to those ponds and culverts quicker? And I had another thing on that, and it just slipped my mind on that. The MS4 part. I consider we are an MS4 city. We've had a lot of conversation about MS4 city and what's all involved with it. I actually consider this an unfunded mandate because we're
Yes.
told when we hit a certain place
Yeah.
that we have to be an MS4. And therefore the state mandates, is it state or federal? I always get confused which
Federal.
one.
It's a federal program that's carried on by the states. It's the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency, but they have the state of Minnesota enforce the rules for the EPA, much like your wastewater.
Okay, so again, unfunded mandate, which gets brought down to the cities, correct? And so as much as I think all of this council will have a hard time with this and residents, we don't have a lot of control or a lot of say in this. And I know that the conversations we've had before is all the reporting we have to do with the MS14s. I mean, it's just kind of crazy, everything that Public Works that Chuck is going to have to do and his staff, right, increases all of that. So I'm just wondering, Mr. Almjad, can you maybe just describe just a little bit, or maybe it's Mr. Erickson that needs to do it as well, the pond, you know, what you do, how you have to clear out the culverts and stuff, just a little bit of understanding with that so we kind of get a general idea what these funds do go for.
Yeah, thank you, Mayor Erickson. Yeah, currently WSB and Public Works, we get the minimum requirements of the MS4 completed, which is basically inspections and a little bit of maintenance, not very much. But with annual, if we had more money in our annual fees, we could do stuff like catch basin cleaning annually, repairs to the catch basins annually, like 20,000 a year. Culverts are something we did nothing with currently. There's no budget for it. Tree removal is a big one. If you see, like say you're on 8 and you see the waterways there, they're full of trees. It's our responsibility to remove them in where the waterway is. We have no budget for that. It would be a good example. So, but then there's GISing all of our infrastructure, like the culverts and all that, and asset management and all that. And we're right back to, it's the personnel and the resources that we currently have. We can't complete any of that work. Not that our permit is, you know, we're not doing the minimum on that. It's just that the actual work that you find in your inspections is not getting completed.
Okay, thank you. And I see Mr. Erickson. Did you want to add anything to that? I see that you're on.
Yeah, Madam Mayor, members of the council, thank you. You bring up a very good point where oftentimes the community doesn't fully understand the costs associated with the responsibilities the city has with the MS4 program. And so, as you may recall, during the proposal process, we talked about a complementary story map that we would prepare. And I just wanted to add to what Chuck had commented on related to that. And I think to really paint that picture of what the MS4 is, what the city's responsibilities are, provide some examples of cost, but really to understand what are we doing, right? I think, you know, we've prepared a draft. We're working on some edits that I've proposed, but it really looks at what are some of the impaired water bodies that we have in our community and immediately adjacent to our community that this surface water drains to. And so I think really to paint that picture, to understand what is the end game, what is the end goal of this program, and how can we make a difference, and what are the activities that we're doing that are required under this program? What benefits are they going to have to these water bodies? And so we have a really neat story map that's interactive that will work really well on your website. We're excited to share that with the council here at an upcoming meeting. Like I mentioned, we're just sharing that, but I think that's a really critical component to any rates or studies, rate studies that you're working through, is to really educate the citizens to the program that you're working with.
Okay, I appreciate that. I'll go around and ask council if they have more questions. I'm sure I'll have a few more that come through. I think the biggest thing is, you know, it's been 9 years without a rate increase. And I do want to clarify one thing. Everybody in the whole city pays for this, right? Every household. So it doesn't matter if you're well and septic or if you're,
Right.
It's everybody, correct?
Yeah.
Every household.
Yeah, Mayor, I'd just like to add one thing to the conversation about the cleaning of culverts and that. One of the things I think that your staff did and working with Mark, and the thought that went into what was really needed for this fund. We spent a good deal of time talking about, the increase in the operating costs so that they could go out and clean the culverts and cut the trees and clean and dredge the ponds. And you look in the capital outlay, you have that Vector trailer. And we started off talking about a whole Vector truck, which was Chuck 500,000, as I recall. And then Chuck, well, we can get a trailer unit that will help us do this. So we can clean catch basins and clean pipes. And we look in the capital outlay, there's money every year for that maintenance of those capital assets now. And there's more labor costs in the operating projections to make sure you have the money to pay the workers to go out and actually do that work. So your staff put a lot of thought in how do we make this work better and make the system function better going forward, and what's it going to take. And there was a lot of back and forth about how those increased costs are going to affect the rates. But in the end, I think they did a good job of balancing the money they needed with the activities they need to undertake to get you where you need to be.
And I appreciate that, because I know that many of us hear that, like my culvert never gets done or my pond never gets done. Well, if we're operating in the negative and we don't have the money of the increases that were needed to take care of it, plus the unfunded mandate, that would make sense then. So to your point, we're really trying to make sure that our community is doing what it needs to do to get this taken care of. So, all right, thank you. I appreciate that. We will go to Member Schilling for any questions or comments.
I actually don't have any more questions. I think everybody's kind of asked the ones that were on my mind. When I look at, because again, this is one of the most hottest topics, I think, in Wyoming on top of taxes as usual, but this is the one that I see the most common. When I'm looking at the breakdown, I actually opened my bill when we started this. And I mean, I used 80,000 gallons in the last quarter. So I tend to have a higher bill than average because I have, 5 people, irrigation, and a pool. So my bills are always expensive, but that's by choice. When I looked at the presentation, I'm always of the feeling of it's like a Band-Aid. It's going to hurt either way. You can take your time hurting yourself or just get it done and over with. But if it's a comment that I'm making, my comment is this: I'd rather do the first proposal than moving cash around and moving things around. I just think that overcomplicates things, and I like keeping money in capital. So, because there are emergencies, there are things that go wrong, and I think this will also increase our ability to take care and maintain these things that we're talking about as well. So,
all right, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Let's go with Member Yeager.
Any chance of receiving this report that I can go over it more?
We certainly will give the council members a copy of the report. I think it was important to have Mr. Dragisich really go through it and talk through and make sure that that the council understood the different things that were taken into consideration for this. But certainly we can share that report out, that draft report.
Okay, because I do have concerns about the operating losses, and I don't have the tables in front of me to really look at that and ask an intelligent question. Is there any way of doing these tasks more efficiently so that the rates can we soften the rates by reducing our expenses?
I think that's up to the council. I think staff, in regards to the activities that need to be done and the different pieces of equipment, as Mr. Dragisich kind of talked about, looking at originally a vac truck that's, 500,000, when we can get the necessary work done with that trailer that was essentially a third of that cost. I think we've tried to really evaluate based on what, those costs for the potentially having the employee time to do these activities, along with what's actually necessary to make sure that we're maintaining our system and doing those activities and the expectations of what comes with this permit. So the council has the ability to, ask that these rates be reevaluated or looked at. But I think we've taken a lot of time and worked with both Baker Tilly, WSB, and our Public Works Department to try to come to what we feel is a good example of the rates, what they need to be to make sure that the permit is intact and the work gets done. But like I said, that's certainly a conversation point with the council if they'd like to.
In the previous page of that report, it seemed to be more of an overview of what capital expenses needed to what capital equipment needed to be purchased. Any way of getting a more detailed list of what capital expenses, what capital equipment will need to be purchased? Like, for example, the vac truck or the trailer type.
That's actually in there by detail in the report. I'm sorry you don't have it in front of you, but there is each capital expenditure is listed separately by year and by funding source and amount.
Again, I would like to see that before I can ask some more questions.
Okay, let's go to Member Lugar.
I guess I don't really have any questions. It looks like, I mean, I look forward to being able to review it. It does look extremely detailed. I feel, nobody likes the idea of charging more in our city, not staff, not council, and certainly not residents. And so I think it's unfortunate that it has to be done, but in the same vein, we have very real consequences of not doing this. And so I think it's a good discussion to be having right now. I anticipate that we'll be discussing it further once we've had the documents to review.
All right, thank you. Mr. Linwood, are we also going to have the documents available to the public as well? We know sometimes what happens, the documents get out to certain people and not others. So will this be available for everybody?
Absolutely. I think it's a draft document at this point, and we'd want to make it to make sure that it's appropriately watermarked as that. But certainly, we can put a draft up on our website or make it available on request to the public. But we'll share that with the council too, even after the meeting, so you have an opportunity to review it in depth, and then we can, once we bring it up again, you can ask those questions that maybe you don't have thought of tonight, but maybe after some more studying in detail.
Okay, and this will be on our YouTube page as well for residents to watch, so they'll be able to have all the supporting documents as well.
Correct.
Okay, all right. If there are no other questions, I think I got to all of council. I don't think there's any further on that. So we really appreciate the presentation on this and all the thought and hard work that went into it. I know that we've been working really hard to make sure that someday we're not all going to be on council, there'll be other people, and that we have a plan in place. And we have been very, very good, the seated council, on making sure that those plans are looked out, and so there aren't any surprises for a council down the road. So we really appreciate the hard work that goes into it.
Thank you. And I think the evidence of your look to the future is your long-range financial plan. I would compliment you on doing that. There are a lot of cities that don't do that. And I had a chance to look through that document, and it's a good document that provides you some insight as where you're likely to be going. So you should pat yourself on the back for doing that, because I can count on one hand the number of cities I know that actually do that exercise on a regular basis.
Thank you. We appreciate that.
Thank you.
All right, Mr. Linwood, is Jean going to be talking next?
Mayor, I believe that we're going to have Jonathan Lewis from Wold Architects. He is here tonight for kind of our second item before we have our budget discussion in regards to, as you know, the city council authorized a needs assessment, a space needs assessment, and Wold has been diligently working through that process with staff, and they wanted to at least present to the city council tonight some of the initial findings and in review of the current status of our facilities. So, Mr. Lewis, will you have a presentation as well tonight?
Yep, I've got a presentation that goes through some of the items that we've been looking at to share with everybody. If we're ready for that, I can certainly pop it up here. Does everybody hear me and see the presentation okay?
Yes.
All right. Thank you, Rob. Thank you, Mayor, Council, for taking the time to look at this. As Rob said, we've been working through kind of some of the finer details of a master planning exercise with the city. And so today, really want to go over basically the details of what that looked like, what we've seen. Always, we start our process with guiding principles. And so our group that was made up of city representatives really came up with a set of principles that help really guide our whole process and set the stage for any potential solutions and help us use that as a measuring stick for if our master planning isn't going in the right direction. So I'll go over those principles that we've developed as a group, and then I'll talk through what we found as the condition assessment, what we've seen in the functional assessment of your facilities, and then a brief overview of our current space needs summary, and then talk through some of the next steps. And I tend to just sort of continue talking, so please stop me if there's comments or questions along the way. I think similar to what Nick said, it's easy to talk about the slide as it's up, and so I'm happy to provide further comments. But this is probably the first of several check-ins with the council along the way here as we kind of further develop what the needs are and maybe some potential solutions that might pair up with those. So with that, I'll talk about those guiding principles. There's sort of three categories that we looked at. One of them is the focus on function and operations. And so each facility solution should accommodate the long-term needs of the department and encourage efficiency, interaction, and collaboration. Solutions need to be adaptable for future changes in operations or growth. The facilities should strive to be safe for staff, but also be open and publicly welcoming. So there's always that sort of balance of making sure that you've got some barriers up to keep people safe, but you still are a city that serves the public, and you want to make sure that they get to be a part of whatever facilities and work that you're doing. The second was a sustainability category. So as maybe there's some potential changes coming with facilities, it's just a focus on planning for common sense approaches for buildings and operations. So whether that's equipment or how things are built or how they're actually operated, we want to make sure that every dollar that's going towards any facility or utility is being used in a fiscally responsible way and in a sustainable way. So then the next one kind of leads into some of that financial stuff is the resilience. Each facility solution should achieve the best functional layout for each department that supports community changes over time. Recommendations should reflect today's immediate needs and support future growth without starting over. And then investments should reflect the community's values and be fiscally responsible. And I think a lot of these guiding principles really speak to the values of the city of Wyoming, and that's why we really have our core planning group develop these statements with us. It's not just Wold Architects coming up with these comments and throwing them out there. These were developed with our core planning group with the city representatives. So again, this is kind of sets the stage for our whole planning process and how we react to the needs that we find. So the next part is really looking at both the condition assessment and the functional assessment. I'll go through that condition assessment, and it's really the evaluation of the physical infrastructure of the buildings that you have. So each building systems are evaluated in order to create a report that we have, which we really look at all different aspects of a building. So we look at the sort of architectural, structural, electrical, mechanical infrastructure, and really looking at sort of what the needs are, whether it be age or condition or things that are due for replacement. It really gives us a big picture view of what the condition of a facility is and its viability either long-term or what their near-term needs are. And I like to say that we usually come up with a pretty long list of things. And so this kind of presentation is a little bit abridged, but we do have a list of a number of different items that eventually we'll be coming up with cost estimates for that will help the city sort of plan some of their deferred maintenance projections now and in the future. So oftentimes we'll talk about all these deferred maintenance items, but just want to make sure that I represent now that that doesn't mean that everything has to happen today. We're usually looking at a 0 to 5 year time frame for some of these deferred maintenance items. So I'll just go through each facility here briefly, and I may not read every bullet point, but I think it's just a recognition of what some of these items are, and some of them might be obvious or some of them might be known already, and some of them might be ones that you haven't considered before. But certainly I can share this presentation with Rob and have it available for the rest of the group here. So for the City Hall assessment, just from a general standpoint, there's certainly some ADA issues that we've seen, not only at the front entrance, but the restrooms is definitely a critical issue that has been talked about a number of different times with our group and the city. The building's not sprinklered. There would need to have some evaluation of any sort of asbestos that's included in the building. So asbestos, lead paint, those kind of hazardous materials. With the age of the facility, it's likely that there could be some of that. But as we look at potential construction projects, we would recommend that you have a certified hazardous material agent come on board and do some additional testing and evaluation of what those needs are. The exterior walls within the ceiling plenum space are not insulated properly, so there's definitely some cold and heat issues there. The existing roof system showing signs of deterioration, and then no security protection of the exterior wall construction and glazing. So oftentimes, not always at a city hall, but other public safety facilities too, you'll have some hardening of the exterior of your building to help protect the folks inside. The next one is the mechanical system. So the rooftop unit or the ventilation systems that you have are really sort of at their end of their expected life cycle. And the capacity of them is really under what would need to be sized for. And then just some other general plumbing and heating issues. There has been some work throughout the years, but just some of the energy aspects and insulation and aging infrastructure, the plumbing itself is definitely noted. From an electrical standpoint, really the service distribution of the building is sort of end of life right now. So ultimately any major project at the City Hall would likely need to be paired with upgrades to the electrical system, the primary distribution systems there. And then there's just sort of various different light fixtures and things at the City Hall that have been upgraded, but there's other ones that still haven't been. So we had just a few representative pictures of, some of the piping that hasn't been insulated, some of the technology and storage items that have been noted, and then just the exterior sort of difficulty with the accessibility entrance there. And we have quite a few more photos that we've been taking, but thought might be best paired with some tours, maybe later on with council if they wanted to look at some of these issues in person. It's always good to see it in person and really get a good feel for what we're talking about when we bring some of these up. So the fire department, definitely some more ADA issues there. Some of the interior finishes there are starting to show signs of wear and tear because it is still part of that, overall City Hall facility. That building's not sprinkled either. And then we have the same comments about the hazardous materials there and the insulation and roof as well. From a mechanical system standpoint, there are some storm drains that are susceptible to damage just based on the material. And then again, the plumbing systems, which there have tended to see some age. In addition to that, there's definitely some critical nature about ventilation systems within a fire station and where those apparatus are parked. Oftentimes you'll have fumes that come in, and you want to make sure you're managing that, not just from a air quality standpoint, but from kind of a safety standpoint from your firefighters as well. And so the kind of situation with the ventilation on both sides of the fire station right now definitely has some needs where it's grandfathered in, but there's some code required upgrades that we would recommend take place to help with that ventilation issue. The next one, the electrical system, again, some needs there that are similar to the city hall. So then just some pictures of the aging fixtures, some of the mechanical systems, and then the storage under the wood staircase and lack of sprinklers throughout the building, something we noted. So then at Public Works, we kind of just put our arms around all the facilities here as sort of a general review. But again, there's similar accessibility issues, interior finishes that are aging, some potential infestation of pests in the interior of the building. They're also not sprinklered. And then one thing that's not noted on here is there's some potential structural issues as well that I think similar to the hazardous materials part of that, if we start to consider some of our options with the facilities and what you might want to do long term, we might recommend that we bring in a separate structural engineer for a more in-depth evaluation of those issues to determine what the potential fixes or costs might be there. From a mechanical system standpoint, the well system at the Wyoming Trail site is really too close to other potential contaminant site locations, which would be, sewer and floor drains and things like that. The floor drain discharges directly into the soil at Wyoming Trail. So there's just from a code standpoint, again, we're grandfathered in there, but the way it's configured really doesn't pair up with the way that you'd want to do that on a modern facility. Plumbing fixtures sort of aging, and then some of the same issues with ventilation here that I talked about at the fire station. There's really not a great direct source for outside air or ventilation air from mechanical systems, and then some other smaller items to be considered that are listed there. From an electrical standpoint, the existing service single phase, so it really kind of limits any sort of expansion capacity there, whether that be in infrastructure or the building itself. And then the rest of the panels and distribution system are end of life. You do have a portable generator there, which really isn't an ideal situation. Typically, if you wanted to have backup power, you'd really hardwire that in with a more permanent solution. So then there's just some representative pictures of, some of the structure, the way that it's configured, some of the way that we have materials hanging there out in the open, and then plumbing systems that you can see on the right there. Kind of, you've been making it work here, but definitely they're seeing some signs of age. So then to go on to the kind of police station, again, it's sort of a common theme here with the accessibility issues, building not being sprinklered, and then a lack of insulation. There's definitely some degradation of the foundation at the facility there. And then the lack of security or ballistic protection of those exterior walls where, you do have a public safety facility there that is sort of lacking some of that hardening that you would like to see. And then mechanical systems, some of the plumbing definitely aging there. The garage area not having adequate ventilation. And then there's a newer furnace and condensing unit, but again, we would look at that as more of kind of residential style, so it might not pair up well with kind of an office environment and give the zone control that people would often expect. And then the Public Works floor drain it does have an overflow pipe routed kind of underneath that building and into the parking lot. So there's a potential risk there. And then the electrical systems, again, the service there is quite overloaded, and so would need to be replaced in the near future here. And then there's just a standalone fire alarm system would be a good modernization of a facility like this. And again, just some pictures of the configuration of the mechanical system and some of the storage items that are noted. So that sort of encapsulates all of the condition assessment pieces. Again, we've got kind of a list of some of the solutions to some of those items, and we've started to put together some costs. So I think in the near future, that's another presentation that we would have with the city to get our arms around what the overall needs are in terms of deferred maintenance costs in each of the facilities. And that can help kind of inform some maybe decisions about what you might want to do long-term or even short-term with the buildings themselves. So then the next one is the functional assessment, and we're really evaluating the adequacy of the space. So that looks at not just what are you lacking today, but what might you need in the future. And it might be changes in the future that are adapting to programs that are changing or departments that are changing around, but it also might be changing in the future just because of growth. And so we know that the city is likely to experience some growth, maybe more so even than some of the neighboring communities. So that's something that as we talked to each individual department and got a good sense of, what was their space like and what was working and what wasn't, we also pushed them on kind of what was needed in the future. And as kind of a filter, that's why we bring all this information back to the core group and say, this is kind of what we heard out of each one of these individual groups. And then we have the opportunity to really say, okay, well, is that a need or is that a want? And so we really, as a group, I think, helped filter down to what the true needs were in terms of space for each individual department. And so I'll go through some of the space adequacy items that we saw, and then I'll talk about some of the square footages and kind of the gap that we have calculated based on those needs. So the city hall, there's really a lack of security and separation between the public and staff. The organization of the building itself just doesn't maximize functionality, and so I think the biggest thing is having Rob be remote from the rest of the staff. And then just some of the other reconfiguration with Fred's group has created some issues. And then a lack of space for current staff and growth within the departments. Kind of what's there means you're really kind of landlocked with what you have in terms of staff. And then the public reception lobby, it sort of tends to be kind of cold and small, and you're really just dumping directly into that building. And so there's sort of an energy issue there too with not having a true vestibule entering into the facility, but it doesn't provide that kind of buffer for a lobby that you might like to see. And then the working environment can be difficult based on the aging ventilation systems. So this is where there's sort of a space issue crossing over with some of the deferred maintenance items, but just something to note. And then just the size and quantity of meeting rooms that I think is something that needs to be probably accommodated for in the future. At the police department, the location's not centralized, and that definitely results in longer response times. The current kind of what was deemed as temporary facility originally when they moved out there really doesn't meet kind of industry standards for a public safety facility. And now more than ever, even with the new building code, there's definitely some storm shelter requirements and tornado requirements that would need to be built with a new station. And so I use that term hardening as a good term just as a generic way to talk about a public safety facility that really hasn't been constructed in such a way to allow those emergency responders to be protected during inclement weather. Facility prohibits future growth. They're kind of stuck with what they have. There's inadequate lobby space and no public restrooms, so not a great spot for the public to meet with the department there. Lack of proper decontamination facilities in the building, so that's really kind of when you have an officer come in from potential rough day, let's say, there's not really a great way to wash up and change and make sure that they're not tracking some of the dirt and things like that through the department. And then the garage really isn't sufficient to protect the city's investments in the vehicles. You can buy a new car for a certain amount of money, but when you look at some of these patrol vehicles, they're really a lot more than just a car. I mean, this is really a driving office that has a lot of technology, has all of their report writing mechanisms in there. And so it really is a good thing to think about of how you might protect that investment. And then just inefficient and inadequate evidence processing and storage to maintain the chain of custody, which is, for some small misdemeanor things, it's not always a concern, but when you get into some, potential issues that are a little bit more high profile, that chain of custody becomes really crucial. And so you want to make sure that you've got your evidence set up in such a way to maintain that. And I think the way that it's set up now really prevents that. And then deficient working space for officer report writing and office space. And then lack of support spaces such as a break room or locker areas that would really be nice to have those patrol folks to be able to use. And then I think one of the other things that I brought up that may not be on here is just having sort of equity between genders. So just the male-female locker rooms, there's probably not adequate facilities already, but then you're also lacking that kind of equity between those. And then the fire department really doesn't meet industry standards for health and wellness. And some of that is just the way that the turnout gear is stored within the facility and the potential to bring in some of the, smoke-laden stuff within an environment that people are still working in. But then the other one is, like I said, crossing over into that deferred maintenance category of just lack of proper ventilation and fresh air in that facility to make sure that the firefighter, as he's coming in, has a way to rid himself of that gear. And then, him or her can wash up and clean themselves off. So there's definitely a lot of focus on health and wellness with firefighters, I think, more recently. And so just the way that the facility is set up now doesn't allow for even great reconfiguration to accommodate that. And then inadequate space for administration, supplies, support rooms, and meeting spaces. I mean, the fire station, if you think about it, is really, 90% of it always going to be the apparatus bays. But that other 10% that really helps in operations, I think, is lacking right now around that building. And then ultimately, those apparatus bays are not going to be tall enough to accommodate new vehicles. And I think that's been sort of discussed previously, but definitely something that's important to note. And then I think it talked about the HVAC portion of that. And then I think the kind of other future model changes that I mentioned in there, if there was a shift to, going from volunteer to full duty crew or something like that, you really have to have a fire station that's configured a little bit differently to either have, somebody that's more on there more often, or even sleeping spaces. I don't think that's the direction that Wyoming's going, but again, there's just a lack of flexibility within the building now to be able to accommodate any future changes. And then the last is the public workspace. So again, not having adequate ADA means that kind of creates some space deficiencies, and I can say that for probably the other facilities as well. But there's not really good area for adequate collaboration. So whether that's plan reviews or just departmental meetings. Everything's kind of happening in one spot right now. And there's also just insufficient space for storage and some of their electronics equipment. And then lack of privacy and space in the break room and locker room. And again, I talked about that sort of gender equity issue. And so just being ready for whether you have those changes with male, female is always smart. And then as the city continues to grow and have newer vehicles, just having space for them and making sure that you've got a facility that can protect them. I think there's a lack of that right now. And then operational inefficiencies in having separate facilities. Obviously, you're going back and forth, and it sounds like now, they're actually staffing the building separately. And so it definitely creates some inefficiencies in just operations throughout the city if you've got to go back and forth at all. And then the township facility has some potential structural issues that I talked about, and I think just further review of that might be necessary depending on what's next. So there's a lot of talking and a lot of bullet points, and I can go on to the next piece, but I'll stop and take a breath and see if anybody has any questions.
All right, council members, I'll just quickly go around and see if somebody has questions on this first portion. So member Schilling?
I don't really have questions. This is all stuff that I was already aware of. I know there's a lot of work and time that goes into this, but I've been to the facilities that we have, and I kind of knew that this was the outcome of what we were going to see. So that's it. That's all I have.
All right, thank you. Member Yeager?
Not at this time. I'd like to have a copy of this to review it further.
All right, and member Luger?
I have no questions at this time.
All right, I think we can continue, Mr. Luce.
Okay, thank you. So then the next piece is really talking about the actual space standards and space needs themselves. And I promise I won't talk as much next here, but I think when we start talking about the space deficiencies and the needs, there's oftentimes you need to base that in some assumptions. And so we're looking at pretty common architectural space use to make sure that we're not just giving everybody 1,000 square foot office, or making sure that not every meeting room is a giant meeting room. It's really taking what the true need is for the number of staff and the sort of what their role is, and pairing that up with square footage that makes sense from an architectural standpoint. And so the space standards that we've kind of got set forth here in front of you is what we've been using to help set the tone for calculating square footage for each of the different facilities and departments and all their different space needs. And we started to develop, I should say, a pretty detailed space program. So it summarizes all the different rooms that are needed within an existing facility and how it would look if there was, trying to correct some of those deficiencies as well. So I think that's, again, like I said, there's definitely some future review with our core planning group and council to look at that program. But I've got just sort of a summary of what that looks like here. So the existing utilization of City Hall is currently about 4,400 square feet. And as we looked at some of the space deficiencies and pair that up with those space standards, the projected need is really closer to about 7,800 square feet. And then at the fire department side, we're at about 5,800 square feet. And ultimately to really accommodate all the space deficiencies and support spaces that I've talked about, we're just a hair over 8,000 square feet for that. And then at the police department, what they've got now is a little over 2,400 square feet. And if we really looked at accommodating all the space needs, including garage space that is necessary for the, protection of those vehicles, depending on how a police department operates, we're closer to that 18,000 square feet. So that's probably where there's the biggest gap. And then at Public Works, existing utilization is about 15,000 square feet, and we've got a projected need of closer to 28,000 square feet. So some of that is just accommodating support spaces, but also, garage bays that are a little bit larger to accommodate a little bit of maintenance, but also some of the newer vehicles that would be larger. So that's sort of a very broad brush look at sort of the space deficiencies that we've been talking about. But again, it's sort of seated in looking at all the existing different spaces, comparing it to those space standards, and then including any additional spaces that weren't included in the original facility or are anticipated to be needed in the future. So overall, maybe it's not a surprise that some of the spaces are small, smaller than the needs represent. But I think kind of the next piece to that is really looking at how do we accommodate those space needs, and whether there's as this kind of graphically represents, there's sort of a timeline to how you might accommodate those space needs. But then there's also the additional thought of, what do you do with the assets that you have? And so as we've been working through some of the issues with the core planning group, it's really talking about, there's two pieces to this. There's the priorities that we might have and what to tackle first, but then also just what makes sense from a solution standpoint. And there's probably a ton of different options that could be discussed, but I think as we start to filter our needs through that set of guiding principles, it helps us really get down to some options that really are the most clear way to probably look toward the future of the city. And I think with that, I can certainly open it up for questions. Some of the priorities and things here are assumptions that we've made, but I'm happy to have, any council member, provide their opinion or thoughts on kind of a path of what kind of approach to take to address some of these needs. But really, I think we're pretty early on in that kind of solution process too. So I'll take feedback, but also want to make sure that council knows that we're going to continue to work on this and look at some of the costs of deferred maintenance, and then also work with the core planning group to come up with lots of different options on how to address these needs. And then, of course, come up with some representative costs that would go along with those solutions.
All right, Mr. Luce, really appreciate this presentation, and there's a lot to it. I don't think too many of us are surprised at what we're seeing. I know this. I personally am looking forward to all 5 of us council members collaborating on this and actually working with city staff, fire department, police department. This is just really going to be a great way for all of us to collaborate and really come to the table with ideas, because this is very important for our city. And I think our residents are going to need to be involved as well. So it might take a little while, but the collaboration among all 5 of us as council members, I think will prove to be very important with this. So with that, I am going to go and ask council members if they have any questions. We'll start with Member Yeager.
Again, I'd like to see the presentation before coming up with some questions, especially the part about how we're going to pay for this.
I don't think we have any numbers yet, if I'm correctly.
Well, right. We don't have any numbers, but this isn't even in our long-term plan. The assumption of the long-term plan, it did not include any facilities. So that would be my big concern. How are we going to pay for it?
Okay. And Member Schilling.
I actually don't have any additional questions at this point. Very good presentation. Obviously, I'd like to see a copy of it as well. So, but I mean, I've been through 3 of these, so and they're always not fun, and it always comes down to that same thing. Ms. Yeager just said was, how do we always pay for it? And that's the part that becomes very difficult for us. But again, we're not at that stage yet. We don't even know what we want or what our goal is at this point. We have many options per this presentation. So.
All right, thank you. And Member Lugar.
I don't have any questions at this time. I do, I appreciate the depth of information and kind of being able to look at the different key pieces and details of things that are ridiculously pear-shaped at this point in terms of our facilities. I do think and I agree. I mean, this is always a difficult thing to discuss in terms of how we pay for it. I think we have a clear and shining example in front of us, not just in terms of facilities, but in terms of the roads and what has happened and the situation that we're in when we're looking at funding those when we do the kick the can down the road approach. We know we have to put in some work. I think, as Mayor Iverson said, it will be important that we all have ideas, that we're all willing to work together to find something, a solution, and different ways that this gets paid for in the short term, midterm, as well as long term.
All right, thank you. I know, and I kind of echo that to Councilmember Lugar, this isn't something that we're going to pay for a year from now, this year or next year. I think many of us would agree that this takes a lot of planning, and we're good at that. So this takes a lot of planning. And if we didn't have this assessment need done, where would we go? We just keep on pushing it back. So we have to start somewhere. And I think this is a great start. It's a great place for us to collaborate on what our residents want and really what our employees need as well. So I'm happy we at least have a starting point, because until now we didn't have one. So really, really appreciate that and look forward to, again, working closer together to kind of see how we can plan for things down the road. So,
Madam Mayor, I have a question.
Councilmember Schilling.
Mr. Luce, could you go back to your screen share again, one thing, just the square footage of the space. I wanted to take one quick peek at something. I couldn't read it on my screen when it was off to the side there.
Were you trying to add it up, Member Schilling?
I'm not adding anything up yet. I just want to know what total square footage use needs to be. So I think it was like 26 or 27 page. There we go. Thank you.
Yeah. Yep.
All right, I got it. Thanks.
Okay.
I'll keep that up a few more minutes.
Already screenshot it and saved it.
Oh, I don't know how to do that.
All right.
I'll go ahead and send this to Rob, and he can certainly share it with everybody. So
that's great. Thank you. We appreciate that. Mr. Lingwood, is there anything else we need for discussion on this?
No, I think Mr. Luce did a fantastic job. Like I said, kind of our starting point through this, this assessment of our current status on those facilities, and we'll continue to work forward with the council on that as we take a little deeper dive on this.
All right. Okay, what do we have next? Do we have Jean coming up next? Or Jean, I'm going to get you on here at some point in time, right?
That's wonderful.
Jean, is it possible to, I know Jean is here, and then I'd like to at least take a moment to introduce Jessie Sturt. She is actually going to be, in correlation with Jean, be representing the city, replacing Hannah Lynch in our finance director. So Jean, I don't know if you want to give the council any background on Jessie, but I think it'd be nice to be able to introduce her so the council's familiar.
That was actually first on my list, so thank you for bringing that up. I am just really, pleased to be working with Jessie. Jessie is a newer team member for us. However, she does have over 7 years of working in governmental accounting. And so, I am just, super thrilled. She has been working with Rob and, city staff here for several months. Everything is going great, but what I didn't want to do is ask Jesse to come in the middle of a budget process when I have been working with everybody. So Jesse is here this evening to really start to get to know the city better and walk through, the budget process alongside of me. And with that, Jesse, feel free to say hi to everybody.
Oh, nice to meet everybody.
Hi, Jesse.
Nice to meet you, Jesse. Do you feel like all eyes are on you right now?
Yes.
Welcome to the city.
Thank you.
And with that, if it's okay with you, I'll share my screen and we'll kind of talk about the general fund budget. All right, let's see here. And it really, really helps if I share the correct screen. I apologize for that. All right, now can you see the budget information here?
Yes.
Wonderful. Okay, so we have talked about the general fund budget for about 5 months now. And so now we're getting closer and closer to the December 1st date when the city council will be asked to approve the overall property tax levy and general fund budget. Of course, at that point, you do have the opportunity to extend it to, one more meeting, which would be a couple weeks later. So as we're looking at, the city of Wyoming, you're very fortunate in the fact that the overall tax capacity has increased about 5.6%. So what that means is that even if the council decides to move forward with having a property tax levy increase of about 5.02%, which provides an additional revenue of $212,000, it actually decreases your tax rate. And what that means to residents is, I'm going to flip back and forth here just a little bit because I think it's important to understand the impacts to the residents, and then we'll go through the different changes in the budget too. If you look at the preliminary estimates, just looking at your taxable market value, looking at 2020 and 2021, we are seeing a decrease in the overall levy to the individual homeowner. And on the residential property, if you have a property valued at $500,000, we're still seeing a decrease. And that's due to the growth that, Wyoming has experienced. Now, that said, these are preliminary numbers. We won't know the final numbers until all of the property tax statements come out, because then we'll have the exact tax rate. These are what our estimates are at this point. And when you're looking at a residential home value, say of $300,000, this is not taking into consideration if they put a screened-in porch or added another garage or any of those value improvements. This is just looking strictly value year over year. So as we go through this, though, if you look at just the general fund, we have a 3.3% increase in the general fund. Because the general property tax levy is going to cover your general fund, it's going to cover any debt levies that you may have, and then it's also going to cover, your capital levies that you have as well. So there is an increase in debt of $210,000, and that's due to the 2020 street project for those bonds that were issued. And then in addition to that, we have another $105,000 going towards capital. And that's really, looking at the draft long-term plan for what, has been projected, what's needed just for 2021, okay? In addition to that, there is in the general fund, there's a new full-time maintenance employee. However, that's not really impacting the general fund at all, because it's being allocated between all of the enterprise funds. Okay, so that's just, but it is a new staff. And so just so that you recognize that is a long-term impact. There is a promotion of a current maintenance worker to a lead utility operator. And 55% of that increase will go to the general fund, with 20% going to water and 25% to sewer. And then there is the crime analyst position that will be promoted to full-time for half a year. So starting in July of 21. Now, there was a significant increase in both your workers' compensation as well as your liability insurance. And this is very typical for, pretty much, every city that I work with, as they are seeing some pretty large increases in both of those. Police department was hit the hardest by the increase. In addition to that, we took a look at all of the different allocations as to how work comp is allocated, property and liability insurance is allocated, to really make certain that each individual department is being allocated the appropriate amount. And when you go through the policy statements, it's fairly obvious as to where everything needs to be allocated to. So here is the original, proposal for the property tax levy itself. And as you can see with the general fund, we had that 3% I was referencing. The capital levy, we have $170,000 indicated there. And that is actually a decrease from 2020. And then we also have the, additional 2020 street levy for the debt. So if there's another option as well, just so that you're aware of that, and just to show you a comparison, if you were to actually keep a flat levy, the tax dollars levy would remain the same, and you'd actually see a tax rate decrease of 2.34%. So if you have a rate decrease of 2.34%, that's truly, you have an increase. I'm sorry, I'm getting a little bit mixed up here as to what I'm saying, so I apologize for that. So you always have options. So if you decide to keep the flat rate, or if you decide to just have it, decrease by the, very minimal amount as far as the overall rate, with the decrease of 0.27. As we look at the other impacts within the general funds, we do anticipate a decrease in the cable franchise fees. So that does have a slight reduction in the revenue. And then licenses and permits, the projection for 2021 is that we will see a slight decrease. Now, depending on what the economy does, of course, that can always change with licenses and permits, but yet we are taking a little bit of a conservative approach just because we're not sure what's going to happen at this point. Under the expenditures, the city clerk, they're just really seeing a change because of the allocation in insurance. Elections, we do see a decrease of about $8,500 because there isn't any elections in 2021. So we are able to eliminate that expense. And the police department, there is a $68,000 increase in wages and benefits. And that's because of cost of living increases as well as step increases. And then we have a decrease in the communications budget in the police department of $12,000. Building inspection, there is a decrease in employee benefits due to the decreased participation in the city's health insurance program. And then parks, they have an increase in the property and liability insurance. And then there's also a new line item for the Tree USA program in the amount of $15,000. So as you can see, the largest percentage of the general fund budget does go for public safety. And then almost half of the budget goes towards public safety. We have about 20% going to streets. We have about 4% going to parks. And, city clerk's office has 10%, financial administration, 6.8%, and building inspection at 5.6%. And the rest of the, areas are very, very minimal as far as the overall budget itself. Now, I realize that all of you have reviewed this same budget several times. It's always good to have a refresher, though, prior to going into the public input meeting on December 1st. And so, at this time, you can always choose to reduce the property tax levy, but you can't increase it. And so if there's any modifications that you would like to see, it would be great to have that conversation at this point, and so we can move forward and bring forward a budget to the December 1st meeting for you.
Sorry, Jean, I have a few questions, and I'm not sure if you or Mr. Linwood would answer these. I actually have 4.
Okay.
My first question would be, I've been doing budget now 6 years. It's still very complicated. And I know coming out of an election year, it was one of the main questions people were talking about, right? Property taxes and it being so high, and it's really hard to take out county versus city versus school and then on down from there, correct? So
Correct.
The questions I'm going to ask is maybe to kind of help understand a few things that we don't have control of. So the first one would be a COLA. Is there any way you can describe what a COLA is and how that affects that budget would be my first question. Then I'm going to ask you about the cable franchise fees. Onto that. Exactly what is that and why are they decreasing? I'm going to ask you about our bonds for our streets. I know that we have a lot of streets that need to get fixed, but we've also had 4 years of street projects. And I think it would help us understand how that bonding works for our streets and maybe why sometimes it takes longer to get things done. And my last one is, what is the Tree USA program? And is that a unfunded mandate? Is that anything that can be decreased? So I'll let you go with that and I'll fill in. If you forget what I asked, I'll help you out with that. So.
All right, I think I have it. All right, COLA. That is a cost of living increase. The council makes a decision each year as to what, if any, cost of living increase that they want to apply to a individual, to all employees across the board, to their wages. And if you look at that cost of living increase, there's also another component, which would be the pay increase based on the performance of the individual employee. So the cost of living increase is something that is applied as of January 1, just to account for the cost of living. And that is a percentage that the city council approves on an annual basis. Okay, so franchise fees. As far as the reduction in the franchise fees, I am going to...
Let me just be clear on that a second. The cable franchise fees that we're talking about. So.
And I am going to let Rob answer that question.
Sure. So in 2019, the FCC did do some changes in regards to how some of the provisions of franchise fees are considered and how cities and other municipal organizations can collect those. So based on some of those changes, there are some, we're not anticipating the normal fees that we receive from our local midco, not as significant as some operators in regards to other cities, but we do, in reviewing our agreement, we are anticipating that there will be a slighter amount of revenue on that. So that's something, there's, like I said, a legislative action, and then something that went right through the Federal Communications Commission. So that's something that we're being handed down from them.
Okay, so Mr. Linwood, that's not something that we have imposed on people that we're collecting, right? That's on the cable company?
Correct. That's something that the FCC came down with on that. So really our options on it were to review at, kind of take a look at our franchise fee agreement, and then to try to monitor those payment agreements and do our best effort to try to determine what kind of effect that will be. But essentially, we don't have any control on that or how that moves forward. Like I said, that was an FCC action.
Okay, and council wasn't the one who imposed that fee though?
No,
Okay.
no, you were not. No, I'm sorry. No, you're not.
All right.
Okay, your next question was in regard to the bonding for streets. Now, in 2020, there was a bond that was done for streets so that there could be a specific area of the city so that those streets could be improved. Now, given the cost, it's almost like taking out a home loan because you pay it off over a number of years. And due to the condition of the streets, there have been, about 4 different bonds that have been issued. So right now we have, 2015, 16, 18, and 20. And there's also a bond back from 2009. However, I'm going to focus on the more recent ones for the bonds themselves. So every time you determine which area of the city that you want to do the improvement to, and you can only do so much because you don't want to have such a financial impact on the community at the time that you're doing it. And so it does take a long time in order to get throughout the entire city in order to get these streets improved. Because each time you do this bond issue, it impacts the overall property taxes themselves. Now, some cities will choose to do, some component of this on special assessments as well, in which then, of course, is going to impact directly to the individual homeowner or commercial business or whatever the case may be. So over time, you are repaying this. And the one advantage of doing the streets as they are now is that Wyoming continues to grow. And so as Wyoming continues to grow, there is a larger number of people or tax capacity, if you'd like to call it, in which that payment of principal and interest can be spread over. Does that address the question that you were asking?
Yeah, and I think it's important to point out as well, our city does a 20% assessment compared to a lot of cities that do 50. And I think I heard one was doing 80%, something like that in there. So I think we're pretty generous with that. But I do believe too, we've had conversations about a pay as you go, that we've kind of been looking into that in our long-term goal. So yes, that does. Thank you. I appreciate that.
Mm-hmm.
And then the last one would be the tree program.
And Rob, I will turn that one to you.
Sure. This was something this year that the council, if you remember, that we identified joining the Tree USA project. This is more of a reallocation of some of those funds. I don't think it's directly just a brand new line item. I think it's more of an identified line item on there. So, but this is something in regards to that. And Ms. Dumas, you can maybe help me, since I think you did a lot of the work on this. And we have to do, I think it's $2 per capita per resident to qualify for this program. So essentially we have to spend that amount a year. And I think a lot of the activities in public works were accomplishing that. And if you have anything you'd like to add, please feel free.
Kelly, I'm going to stop you right there. Your mic isn't working. It's not working right.
Sometimes if you mute and unmute, it'll help.
I can help her out real quick. It was $2 per resident. So we used $10,000, that salt savings that we had. We used that for Tree USA. And then we also put 5,000 in that budget. And then the other 5,000 to make $20,000 is going to be labor from Public Works out of the labor, but that makes to make it $20,000.
Okay, and Mr. Umjold, how many, obviously we can't see how many trees, but it's planting trees, can you just describe that a little bit more about what that is? And it looks like Kelly's back as well.
Yeah, so for this year, we planted trees in Comfort Park as a project. We also, the trees, major trees in right-of-ways, we contracted it out for to have the trees cut down, then we removed the trees, and we're still in that process. But them large oak wilt trees that are in the right-of-way are very expensive. So I think we planned on 12 to 15 trees this year total. And then that would use up our budget for Trio, say, between the
It
two.
doesn't take much, does it?
No, not at all.
Okay. All right, thank you. That answers all my questions. I know that was a lot of them. I really appreciate it. So I will ask council now if they should have any further questions. I will recommend to council that this is our 5th or 6th time we've seen this. We are at the point now that if you have any suggestions whatsoever of what needs to be changed, we do need to know specifics, not just that it needs to be lowered. So if you have specific ideas of what needs to be done, we need to hear it tonight as discussion. So with that, I will start with Member Schilling.
I actually have nothing at this point. I've been through this enough. I'm kind of fine with what we had proposed, so.
All right, thank you. Member Yeager.
Would you please repeat what Ms. Dumas said about the tree funding, the tree board? Because my internet something cut out and you were all frozen.
I'm happy to repeat myself, Member Luker, or Member Nanko Yeager, apologies. The City Council identified the Park Advisory Commission as a body that would be well suited to perform the duties of a tree board and to monitor the city's tree infrastructure throughout the city. And a part of that responsibility, it really suits well to actually monitoring what is happening with the funding that we are putting towards trees already. So a lot of that money was already in the Public Works budget, and the proposal is moving those dollars from the Public Works budget into the park budget so that it can be overseen and reviewed by the tree board.
Okay. Yeah, I don't know what's wrong, that it just, everybody froze. Oh, it was still here. Oh, good. Okay, thank you.
Yes.
All right. Member Yeager, were there any other questions or comments?
Well, I do still think this is too high, especially if you're going to start raising stormwater fees. And as for specifics, you did ask that question when we set the do not exceed levy, and I did give you specifics. It was repeated in the paper. So.
All right. Well, again, you're very helpful with that. And I would like to say that we have not said for sure that we're raising stormwater fees. So surface water fees. So I am going to put that in there. Member Luker, it is now your turn for comment.
Well, I have no questions.
All right. So there are no further questions. Mr. Linwood, what else do we need to do with this?
Mayor, members of council, if there's no other questions or discussion in regards to that, I think that Ms. McGann did a nice job with the summation on that. So that's really all staff had tonight. It was just an opportunity to try to have some comment and discussion on these items. And I think a lot of it we did. So we appreciate that. So I don't have anything further.
All right. And so with that, we will need a motion to adjourn.
Member Schilling, make that motion.
All right. And do we have a second?
I'll second, Member Luker.
All right. Member Luker makes a second. And I think I'll just go around the room. Member Yeager.
Aye.
Member Schilling,
Aye.
Member Luker,
Aye.
Mayor Iverson is an aye, and so we are adjourned. I appreciate everybody. It was a long meeting. Jesse, looking forward to working with you in the city, so we appreciate that. And just everybody hanging out. And then the presentations were amazing. So thank you very much, and I hope everybody has a great